This video is going to be talking about compound inequalities, which is really two inequalities that we're solving and graphing on one number line. So this video is going to focus on conjunctions, which are statements or inequalities that are connected by the word and. And when we say something and another thing have to be true, right, both statements are going to have to be true at the same time. So for example, a conjunction would be x is greater than or equal to -2 and x is less than 1. So we can first start by figuring out what our graphs would look like. So if we pay attention to the first inequality, we know that a greater than or equal to sign would be graphed with a closed point at -2. Oppositely, x is less than 1, right? We know if it's just a less than sign, we're graphing that one with an open circle. So we're going to graph both of our endpoints and then we're going to decide where to shade. So we need x's to be greater than -2 but also smaller than 1, and that's precisely where that blue line covers in between the left and the right points. Most conjunctions we could put together and write as one larger inequality. So if I took x is greater than or equal to -2 and I turned it around, I would get -2 is less than or equal to x, right? And I still have my second one, which is x is less than 1. So if you push them together until the x's overlap, you get one big compound inequality that says -2 is less than or equal to x, which is less than 1. So we should be able to graph the following conjunctions, right? In number 1 we have -3 is less than x and x is less than 4. So I first went ahead and I rewrote this together, right? Again, I took the two separate inequalities, I pushed them into each other until the x's just overlapped. So if we're going to go to graph this, we know that we need to use open circles at both endpoints because we have just less than signs. So I'm going to put an open circle at -3 and an open circle at 4. And since x is sandwiched in between, right, we want values that are in between -3 and +4. Similarly, in number 2, right, we have -2 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 4. So we look at our first inequality sign, -2 is less than x. We know that should be marked with an open circle at -2. Then we have x is less than or equal to 4. We know that should be a closed point at 4. And again, x is sandwiched in between the two values, so we want to shade in between the -2 and the +4. So you might be wondering why we would use these compound inequalities. So I have a couple of examples. Here's my first example. Major League Soccer teams have anywhere between 18 and 30 players on their rosters. So if you're familiar with Major League Soccer, or maybe you've watched the World Cup, or you watch soccer during the Olympics, you might have an idea that that's about the size of most of the teams. Right, what we want to know is if there are 16 Major League Soccer teams in the United States, how many people are playing in the MLS here in the US? So we'd first want to write a compound inequality just to measure the number of players on one team. So let x equal the players on a team. Right, what we know is that x can be anywhere between 18 and 30. So we know that 18, right, is less than or equal to x, right? That's the smallest number of players that they can have on their game day rosters. But they can't have any more than 30. So x also has to be less than or equal to 30, right? So that would say, right, our inequality, that x has to be anywhere between 18 and 30, right? It can equal 18 and it can equal 30, but most of the time it's probably somewhere in between, right? So what we know is that there are 16 Major League Soccer teams that are playing currently in the United States, and we want to know how many men in the US are playing in the Major League Soccer. So what we can do is we can say, okay, so if X is the number of players on a team, right, we know that X is between 18 and 30. We know that there are 16 teams in the league. So I'm going to multiply the 18, the 30, and the X by 16. So we're going to multiply now 3 parts of an inequality rather than 2 sides of an equation. So we can take 18 and we can multiply that by 16, right? So I'm just like you guys. If I don't have a calculator handy, I'm going to need to do some of this work here on the side. And I get 288. That's going to be less than or equal to 16x, right? So that's the players in the entire league. 16 teams times the number of players on a team is less than or equal to, and then we have 30 times 16. So I can do that over here on the side as well. That's going to give me 480. And so we can conclude that if there's between 18 and 30 players on an individual team, that there must be somewhere between 288 and 480 men playing Major League Soccer here in the United States. That's a pretty big range, and I'm sure that range would be similar for any other sports. I mean, think about how many people are on a football team or how many people are on a basketball team and how many different teams there are throughout the nation. The second example, and something that you guys may be starting to think about here in the future, right, is how to calculate your semester grade. So we're getting to the end of quarter 2, we're going to be taking midterms, and we know that we're going to have to end, right, and we want to get certain grades so that we're proud of ourselves. So here, let's say that you earned an 84 first quarter and a 76 second quarter. Right, a lot of students will ask me, Mrs. McClure, what grade do I need to earn on the midterm in order to finish with an A or a B or a C in the semester? So let's say that you're really hoping for a B for the first semester here. Right. What I would tell you is, what do we know? So we know in quarter 1 you earned an 84, in quarter 2 you earned a 76, and you want to finish the semester with a B, right? So we know that a B is anywhere between an 80 and an 89. So we know that a B, again, 80 is going to be the lower bound, and 89 is going to be the upper bound, right? So B is greater than or equal to 80, but less than or equal to 89. So we want our grade to be somewhere in that range. So here at Pilates, right, we weight our grades, so we know that quarter 1 is worth 40% of your grade. Quarter 2 is worth another 40% of your grade. And your midterm, right, which we don't know yet, is going to be worth 20% of your grade. And if you take an average of the 3 of those, that will give you your semester grade. So what we want to do is we want to set up an inequality. So 80, again, that's our lower bound. Right, that's going to have to be less than or equal to our semester grade. So 40 as a decimal, right, if we change a percent into a decimal, we move the decimal point over 2 spaces, right, what we're going to do is we're going to find a weighted average. So our first quarter was an 84, and we're going to multiply that by 0.4, plus we got a 76 second quarter, that's also going to be weighted by 0.4, plus we have a midterm. We don't know what that is, so I'm going to call it X, and that's going to be weighted at 20% or 0.2. Right? We also know that our upper bound on our grade would be an 89, right? A B somewhere between an 80 and an 89. So what we can do is we can try to come up with this grade and see exactly what we need to earn on the midterm to get a B for the semester. So I'm going to take my 84 and I'm going to multiply it by 0.4. That gives me 33.6 plus 76 times 0.4 gives me 30.4 plus, and I'm just going to move these around so they look a little bit more normal to us, right, 0.2x. So what's 33.6 plus 30.4? If we combine these two, I think we get a 64 plus 0.2x. And again, let me rewrite my boundaries. Right? We want that grade to be somewhere in the range of a B. So this would be what we're going to be solving a lot of in this course, right? We have 64 plus 0.2x has to be somewhere above an 80 or below an 89. So again, when we solve, we want to get that x by itself. To do that, I'm going to subtract the 64. But now that we have multiple parts to our inequality, I need to subtract it 3 times and not 2. And that will give me 16 is less than or equal to 0.2x, which is less than or equal to 25. Right? My last piece, right, again I want to get x by itself, is I'm going to divide all 3 parts of my inequality by 0.2. If you do that, right, where that would be 16 divided by 0.2, which is the same as 16 times 5. So that gives me an 80 as my lower bound. X is going to be the grade on my midterm, and 125 on my upper bound. So what that would tell us is, since we can't get 125% on our midterm, right, if we want a B for the semester, we need to earn at least an 80 on our midterm exam.